It was probably all four. It was I thought it was the combination of values that I thought made it something very fresh, and I suppose the surprise that this mythic Moby Dick character was actually inspired by real events, and then I found those real events to be both epic and also very human, and even a little bit political and thematically relevant to today. I'm not a big fan. I mean, I respected the novel. I'd seen the John Huston movie a couple of times. But I've always had a big fascination with dramas set in the ocean, or under the ocean, like the German movie Das Boot, one of my favorite movies. And there's something very foreboding about it and mysterious. The reality is that on a personal level, I don't particularly like the ocean. It frightens me a little bit. Well, when I was a boy, I was a child actor, and there was an American show in the 60s called Route 66. Has anybody ever heard of Route 66? So I was 8 years old, and I acted in this one episode. And in the episode, I had to jump into the ocean, and it was the real ocean. And I could swim, but I'd never been in the ocean. And when I jumped in, I was terrified. And I'm under the water. I remember it went on forever. I felt like I was under the water forever. The bubbles cleared away. I just saw this blue expanse. I popped up. I was screaming, "Dad! Dad!" Fortunately, the character had a father in the movies, in the show, so it didn't ruin the take. But I did have to do it again. It was a little bit better. And it was all right. But 1 hour later, less than an hour, there was a lot of excitement. And suddenly all the men were running around and they were pulling up this line and they caught this big shark. It had obviously been in the water very near where I had jumped in. And I think from that point on I was a little bit terrified of what was out there. So then when I directed Splash in the early 80s, I had to not only film a lot of scenes on the ocean, but I also had to learn to scuba dive in order to direct the underwater scenes with the mermaid. So this got me over my phobia. And so since then, I've spent a lot of time working on the ocean, but I never go there for enjoyment. But I actually felt like I understood something about working on the ocean from Splash and then Cocoon. And I wanted to make a movie that was entirely set in the ocean. So in the late 70s, early, like 83, 84, I was trying to make a movie about Greenpeace and this ship Rainbow Warrior. I wanted to tell this dramatic true story, and I could never get the financing to do that. But I planned it. I thought of a way to make it in a reasonable budget, but we didn't get to do it. Then, about 15 years ago, I wanted to do Jack London's Seawolf, because I thought it would be great to do a 19th century sea adventure. Well, that was too expensive. Couldn't get we couldn't get things right, and ultimately that one disappeared. So when Chris Hemsworth brought me this, in many ways, I felt that I had the experience to do it. I had the right actor to play Owen Chase. I'd had a good relationship with him in Rush. And the story, actually, it accomplished some of the things in both movies. And so it just seemed like this was time for me to make this sea adventure. I think it's this transformation and this gaining of kind of a humility, which is difficult for him, because he's so prideful and so driven by that pride that sort of enrages him and fuels him, and then suddenly, as a result of this confrontation, he is really forced to think of himself as something small and insignificant, and it recalibrates his thinking in a way that I find moving. Well, I mean, I understand being very ambitious. I also understand kind of a frustration with trying to break through preconceptions. And I think having been a child actor from television sitcoms, when I was beginning to dream of making movies, it was just a preposterous idea. And I used to be very frustrated. People would say to me, "Oh, you want to be a director? That's cute." When you get to be 30 or 35, I'm sure that you'll have an opportunity to try that. And I was like 18 or 19, and I'd say, fuck that. I want to do it now. And but otherwise, I don't particularly, I'm not this kind of man of action with that kind of, force. I think it was the most complicated movie that I've ever made, even more complicated than Apollo 13 or Backdraft. The combination of the technical challenges, the logistical challenges of working in those difficult environments, and also balancing these various storylines and trying to make them blend. I was very interested in this. It's also unorthodox, but that was one of the challenges that intrigued me. So every day was filled with complications and creative problem solving with a kind of an intensity that I don't think I've ever experienced before throughout an entire 72 days of shooting. That actual decision was made before I was involved in the project in the early development of the script, and I agreed with the writer for creating this fiction, this portion of fiction, because it still reflected the overall truth. Melville discovered the story in a very complicated way, and in fact kept revisiting it, and finally did meet Pollard, and I think he met Nickerson as well years later. And his journey included rewriting Moby Dick, and in between the rewrite, he went back and read his notes and some journal notes, and a book by about the Essex that Chase had written, an account that Chase had written, and then he went back, and in the second draft he included Ahab for the first time. So I thought it was a simple, dramatic piece of dramatic license that helped frame the story well and offer some insight into the creative process, even though it wasn't the literal. The thing that we took more literally was the actual survival story. And the other thing that I would just say is that Peter Morgan, who wrote Frost Nixon and Rush, of course in Frost Nixon, in reality there was never a phone call in the middle of the night, but it was a simple dramatic device to tell you a lot about Nixon and a lot about Frost and a lot about their personalities. Just as Niki Lauda and James Hunt never had a scene where they met again at an airplane and talked about their relationship. They saw each other other times, they grew to have this affection, but what I've learned over the years is that you need to, and what Peter Morgan often says is that you sometimes have to create fiction so that within a movie you still reflect the truth, a greater truth, and so again, one of the reasons why I found that poetic license, that device, to be effective and useful. Well, there's nothing planned now, but I would love to work with Chris again. And he won the role in Rush through an audition that he made himself while he was on location doing the first Avengers. And just in his hotel room, he did a monologue from the script, and he also found something on the internet and recreated an interview with James Hunt, and his body language was different, and his accent was different. And Peter Morgan and I were so impressed with him, and he just continued to demonstrate that kind of ability as we were making Rush. And so this is a very different kind of character, not quite as sexy and and loose and entertaining, but very, very challenging. It's the calling card is this sort of striking charisma and this presence, like many kind of classic leading men of movies. But the thing that will give him the longevity is this creative appetite that he has to be effective in all kinds of movies, comedies and dramas, as well as action and fantasy. Well, there are some whaling museums in the East, including Nantucket, but also New Bedford, and a place called Mystic, that have tremendous detail and can tell you all about the entire process, including the manufacturing. And of course, it was along with agriculture. It was the sort of the primary economic engine for the growth of the American economy at this time. So there was a tremendous amount that was written about it, and it was fascinating to research it. We also were able to see a lot of photographs and some silent movies that still captured, made in like the 1920, but very accurately reflected the classic old-fashioned sort of whale hunt, and of course with no conscience about it. There were hints of this sort of new moral understanding. This dilemma was starting to take shape, and you could see it in some of the journals of the shipwrecked crew, who wondered whether this whale attacking them was in fact punishment. And it's also in Melville's writing in Moby Dick in a few sentences. Well, because of the tall ships, and we felt like that we needed as much height as we could have. In fact, we even thought about shooting it in square, and the studio didn't like that idea very much, which I could kind of understand ultimately. It felt more appropriate given the kinds of frames that we'd be trying to create. Well, we also filmed in the ocean, almost half the movie. So anything that could be filmed on the actual ship or in the whaleboats was shot in the actual location. So knowing that, even when we were, for safety reasons, because of the kinds of stunts that we were doing that we couldn't control out in the ocean, we always knew that we needed to create something that was as seamless as it could possibly be. But let me add one more.
Yeah, sure.
Say that and then I'll add one more.
No, go ahead. No.
Okay. One time there was something that was supposed to be shot in a tank. We were in Lanzarote, but it wasn't. We were in Lanzarote, which is a volcanic beach, and that was where the desert island set was. And it was a park. It's a very special beach there. We had a permission to go there, but we couldn't go in the water. We were forbidden because of riptides and all the rocks and the sharp volcanic rocks. And so I was going to get a shot instead of Chris Hemsworth in a tank, and we would just kind of get something, a propeller or something to stir up some waves. And Chris kept saying, I'm a surfer. I can tell you it's not dangerous. I could be all right. This was when he was at his very thinnest and weakest. And the underwater photographer, who was very experienced, said, I don't think it's going to be a problem, Ron. And I said, look, we have very strict rules. We're permitted to be here, I can't allow that. We're going to have to do it this other way. It's a compromise, but we have to do it. So then I was going to shoot the scene over here, and I looked around for Chris, and he wasn't there. And of course, I saw him out here in the ocean, bobbing up and down. And he and the camera operator went there and got some great shots. Those are the shots of Chris crashing around and underneath and washing up onto the ocean. So I was very thankful for Chris's courage, and it helped us, be as authentic as we could be. You can do little enhancements with CGI, but very difficult and very, very expensive for all of the number of shots that we would have had to actually make it look very authentic, and we couldn't have afforded it either. So it was very important for them to make that commitment and really lose that weight. There was just no other, we couldn't have.
Was it dangerous?
Well, we did it with nutritionists and trainers. I had even consulted with Tom Hanks, who'd done it twice. The first time he did it on his own, and he felt like he suffered some health problems as a result. The second time he did it for Castaway, and that time he did it under the care of a nutritionist and a trainer. And that's certainly, the way we approached it. As far as the whale, well, there was an albino whale that Melville took inspiration for. That's not the whale that ran the ship. And so he combined them to create the mythic whale, Moby Dick. We discovered that there is this skin ailment, that a kind of a sickness that older whales can get that makes their skin blotchy. And we thought, well, if we do that, we can call him white and still be true to our own story. So this was, again, another situation where, we were kind of stretching the boundaries of poetic license in order to live up to the myth and yet still, remain as close as we could to the true story. Well, I worked with Anthony on Rush, and I was very impressed by our collaboration. I enjoyed it, and I felt like it was psychologically driven, which was important to me, because I don't really like the graphic ideas to stand alone. I want them to be to reflect, the emotional state of the characters as much as possible. Because of the classic nature of this story, I was very interested in presenting it in as modern and aesthetic as possible. So I asked Anthony if he thought we could achieve this, and we talked about it. And he had some good ideas about sort of blending old and new from a cinematic standpoint, and still finding ways to connect the characters to the sea, to the ship, to the whale, to each other, that I really agreed with, and I was excited about it. And so it was a pleasure to collaborate with him again. I was very, very pleased with what he did. The other thing that I wanted was a kind of an intimacy and an intensity. And Anthony is very energetic. He takes these small cameras. He sort of crashes into the action with them. He hides them in places that that are hidden away in a kind of unusual angles that just connect you to the action in cool, unusual ways. And so that sort of creative, that visual energy was something that I thought was going to be very helpful with this this epic story. I don't have any personal ambition to revisit Happy Days as a director, although it lives very fondly in my memory.
Character?
Oh, geez, I don't know. Justin Bieber. The Beatles project is fascinating. Since my kids are grown, I have a little bit of time to experiment. And I did a documentary about Jay-Z's first music festival that he curated called Made in America. And I found I really enjoyed it, and I was able to participate, explore, and sort of put my stamp on it in ways that I honestly didn't expect to. And through that, through some of the people involved on the producing side with Rush, who also produced great music documentaries, I found myself, invited to make this documentary about the Beatles and their touring years. And I feel like that's an interesting odyssey. It's sort of its own adventure story. I feel like we can tell about this amazing group. And so, I hope to live up to people's expectations. That may be an impossible task, but I'm having a fantastic time learning even more about those geniuses and the journey that they went on during that period from about 1962 to 66.
To revisit Happy Days as an actor.
It's
the same character.
Well,
today?
yes.
Would you accept to do that?
Every once in a while somebody asks me to act, and I'm just so busy directing. So even with Happy Days, I'd probably say, let's keep that one in the past. It's a good memory. Let's let it stay in the memory. Well, I still can't really talk about it, although it's looking very, very promising. We think we found a really fantastic director, Danish guy, who's really outstanding. But I really can't talk about it too much. I've been asked not to reveal very much, but except if you're a fan like I am, you can be very hopeful that something good is coming. No, we did not have the time or the budget to consider shooting it in 3D, but the movie was delayed from the spring to this time of year, and although it was completely finished, so there were no production reasons to delay. It was just a marketing decision, one that I agreed with, because I feel like this time of year is a time of year when audiences, they choose to see several movies over a holiday, not just one, and they open their mind a little bit more to different kinds of movies, and this is certainly a different kind of movie. So I'm excited about it coming out now. One of the other pluses was that we had time to consider doing a 3D conversion. And Warner Brothers has had a lot of experience with that, and they brought the idea to me, and I saw some test shots, and I felt like it not only brought even added intensity to the action, but it also seemed to offer texture and depth and power to the emotional character scenes as well. And once I saw which was only about 3 weeks ago, the final complete version, I was very, very pleased that we had this opportunity. And so my suggestion would be to people who enjoy 3D, I would go see the movie that way. But the movie was designed to be totally immersive 2D experience, and I'm proud of the way it functions in that medium as well. I'm always interested in unusual ways in which characters can be tested and challenged. So a natural result of that, of course, are some examples of real courage, and also some examples of people who do not have the courage and can't face the challenge. So this movie in particular, you know, had examples of both, and that interested me. But I am, you know, I think I'm always interested in a movie where we can ask ourselves what we would do in that situation. And I don't know that I would be courageous, but I take a lot of inspiration whenever I see any story, where, you know, fiction or nonfiction, the reality, the news, where people take those extraordinary steps to achieve, to protect, to serve. I'm always very moved by that. So I am drawn to it in stories when I find it, without a doubt. But I would say, I would just also say that I would never try to force it into a story, and manufacture that. But when it's there, you know, I certainly like to explore it. Thank you. You know, I was very attracted to that portion of the story as well, and the screenwriting attracted them. You know, it was a very intensive but short period of shooting, but it was so focused, and again, each man did a lot of research. Some of the lines were coming out of that research, out of journals that were written by both Thomas Nickerson and Owen Chase, and Pollard's account of the event. There was a great book called Why Read Moby Dick that Nathaniel Philbrick wrote. Same writer. It's a very short but really interesting book that kind of connects the two stories in certain ways and reveals a lot about Melville. So it was those scenes were always working on 2 or 3 levels, and it was very creatively intense and interesting both in the rehearsal period and our sort of 5 days of shooting to keep exploring all of those dimensions for the emotion, for the humor, and for the underlying themes. So I'm glad you liked it. Wow. Well, at this stage of my life, I just don't think I would want to go back and sort of remake one of my own movies. I love Warwick Davis. He's remained a friend, and George Lucas as well. So, you know, if we were talking about extending the character and doing something else, that might be kind of interesting to be able to apply today's technology to the fantasy of Willow and that world. But even that would be something I'd have to be very thoughtful about. It's sort of a surprise to me that I've stayed with these Dan Brown projects. But each book hasn't felt like really a follow-up. It's kind of in its own mystery. And this latest one, Inferno, is a very modern kind of a crisis, and more of a psychological thriller. And I love working with Tom Hanks. So I keep having these opportunities we're using the same character, but they always feel like different movies to me in some ways.
Qu'est-ce que c'est? Accrochez-vous!